So I just wanted to show you the coverage that the Intercept does with a straight face on Syria. Just garbage. So here, this is from 2018. A guy named Robert Mackey wrote it, April 20th, 2018. Russia sows doubt over chemical attack in Syria, aided by pro-Trump cable channel. I mean, right there, you would go, hey, Robert Mackey, why don't you just go work for a public relations organization? They pay better than journalism, and this isn't journalism. You obviously don't want to do it. Why not fucking just go work for a PR company? Why not just go work for the CIA? Maybe he is. Who knows? Maybe he is. Most of the reports, this is from that article, most of the reports which were for Russian and Syrian state television channels, but also for British, French, German, and American outlets, featured interviews with witnesses at the medical clinic who corroborated the version of events presented last week in a Russian military video report. Namely, the narrative that the victims of the attack who were treated showed no signs of exposure to any chemical agent and were only doused in water by volunteer rescue workers who recorded the scene as part of a hoax. There was no way of knowing if the medical personnel who spoke to the reporters in the presence of government minders had been coerced into making those statements by threats from Assad's secret police. There's no way of knowing. There's no way of knowing. So you just made it up and put it in your report. You just made it up.
There's no way of knowing, but I'm going to suggest that it's 100% true.
Yes, there's no way of knowing.
That's just hack journalism 101. Yeah.
That sounds like
it really is such a gimmick too that you see over and over again. I think it should be a requirement that you have to have something from your 6th paragraph in your headline, because all too often it's like the headline will suggest X, and then in paragraph 6 they're like, yeah, actually we have no idea if X is really a thing or not, but thanks for clicking.
But they're still going to assert it, even though, you know what else we have? You know what else there's no way of knowing? If the guy who wrote this, Mackey, if he's been working for the CIA his whole life, there's no way of knowing. There's no way of knowing that he's taking direct funding from the intelligence communities and then putting garbage, planting it in the Intercept that's obviously such garbage that a pothead comedian could debunk it. There's no way of knowing if he's taking direct funding from the CIA to do that. There's no way of knowing. Still, Russian state television channels and critics of Western military intervention seized, listen to how they word this, Aaron, they seized on credulous reports. So they're saying that Russia TV and critics of the United States military intervention seized on true reports that were believable. They seized on them. You mean they repeated accurate reports? That's another way to put that. Intercept, you fucking hacks. But they put it this way, which I've never heard a sentence written like that. Still, Russian state television channels and critics of Western military intervention seized on credulous reports from the British writer Robert Fisk. So did I. You know why? Because Robert Fisk is the most award-winning journalist that Europe has ever known. That's why I went to Robert Fisk and I got his reporting. He was on the ground in Syria, and he said it didn't happen. But they're making it look like Robert Fisk somehow is a bullshitter, and these people are seizing on Robert Fisk. And it says the French news agency, France Press, Dirk Emmerich, Germany's RTL, and Pearson Sharp, One American News, and San Diego Cable Channel, known for its full-throated backing of Donald Trump. So if you repeated a credulous report by Robert Fisk, you're a Trump supporter. That's what the Intercept is saying. If you repeat a credulous report by the most award-winning journalist in Europe on war ever, Robert Fisk, you are a Trump supporter. Now, there's no way of knowing if the CIA told Rob Mackey, the guy who wrote this, to do that specifically. There's no way of knowing that they did that or not. But why else would you do that? But there's no way of knowing. So so do you want to? So we're going to move on.
Let me just say,
Go
Jimmy,
ahead.
think about what a punk sentence that is. He's sitting in front of his keyboard.
Yes.
In New York City or wherever. Robert Fisk, the veteran Middle East correspondent, as you say, is on the ground in Douma. He's walking around. He's doing reporting. Multiple other journalists have found similar things, and he's sitting there declaring from his keyboard in Brooklyn or wherever that people are being credulous by trusting one of the world's most celebrated journalists who's actually on the ground. And why is he saying that? Solely for one reason, because anonymous U.S. intelligence officials have been declaring that Syria is guilty. And thus, anyone who doubts that must be credulous and dupes. He's projecting. He's the dupe. And that's unfortunately so much of what journalism is these days, including at self-described adversarial sites like The Intercept. It's a self-parody.
You know, as a dude in a Bad Religion t-shirt right now, I do have to say as a side note, if I ever describe something as a punk sentence, it would be a good thing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Me.
Yeah, okay. Sorry,
I mean, no,
Ron.
it's fine. It's fine. I just, it's just ironic.
No, fair enough. I meant punk
we're
in the...
here together.
No, I'm glad you clarified that. I meant punk in the purely disparaging way. I'm sorry. Yes, I didn't think of that meaning. I meant punk purely disparaging way.
Here's another one. Here's their other article on Syria at The Intercept. So I've been asking people, show me the Intercept's coverage of Syria. I'll show you the Jimmy Dore Show's coverage of Syria. And who's the lying gaslighter? Who's the conspiracy theorist? Who's repeating CIA talking points? It would be the Intercept bullshit, garbage propaganda reporting that I can outdo, and I'm showing you how I'm doing it. Because I got sick and fucking tired of people on Twitter saying, you don't do journalism. Well, watch this. I'm doing better work than they are right now, because it's not hard. So here's another article. This is written by James Harkin. James Harkin, huh? Guy looks like a leatherneck. He says, what happened in Duma? Searching for facts in the fog of Syria's propaganda war. Syria's propaganda war, not the United States. And so here we go. He says the video and photos. By the way, here's the picture that was supposedly dropped from a helicopter and it landed on someone's bed. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. That's real. That's the picture they used. The video and photos of an attack which targeted an apartment building has been collected mainly by a group of opposition activists called Duma Revolution, who'd been working for some time in the area. That photo and video evidence was republished by Bellingcat. Now, if you know what Bellingcat is, if you watch the show, Bellingcat is literally guys who have absolutely no expertise, don't know anything except they're being funded by the United States government, the NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, to go smear people and promote propaganda, pro-Syrian war propaganda. We've exposed them a million times here. They don't deny that they're funded by the NED, and they do garbage work, and we've debunked it a million times. Aaron Mate's debunked Bellingcat a million times. Go to his Twitter thread. They will never respond to his requests for facts. So, according to The Intercept, they go to Bellingcat. That's who they're not going to Aaron Mate. They're not going to the Gray Zone. They're not going to Robert Fisk. Who do they go to? They go to Bellingcat, a completely bogus, discredited propaganda organization. I know that, but apparently James Harkin at The Intercept, bullshitter extraordinaire, and we don't know, there's no way to tell if he's working directly for the CIA or not. He said that. That's what he's doing. He went to the Bellingcat. The guy who works for the fucking... Now do you know why The Intercept sucks? Do you know why they're shit and I can outdo them like that? Because they're shit. That's why. And they're shit on purpose. James Harkin knows he's doing a shit job here, but he's getting paid to do a shit job. Just like Cenk Uygur was paid to kneecap Force the Vote. Just like Ryan Grimm was paid to kneecap Force the Vote. They're being paid to write this claptrap. They know it's not true.
Jimmy, what you just mentioned about Bellingcat being funded by the U.S. government and partnering with state propaganda operations like they do with the UK, as Max Blumenthal recently reported at the Gray Zone, what you just mentioned there, you will not be able to find the acknowledgement of that fact that they're U.S. government funded by the NED, CIA regime change arm. You will not be able to find a mention of that anywhere. So this is a good example of that. He portrays them as a UK-based organization specializing in open source online investigations. So the fact that they're funded by the U.S. government, they're basically a NATO troll farm, that is down the memory hole. You cannot mention that in our so-called free press. You will not find a reference to it anywhere when everyone knows it. It's an open secret, but it undercuts their usefulness because we have to pretend as if there's some kind of sort of independent digital sleuths. So you cannot mention that just glaring fact that they're a state-funded organization.
So there it is. So James Harkin, the garbage reporter for the Garbage Intercept, goes to Bellingcat as a credible source when you and I all know they're not. But he doesn't care. He's going to continue to get a six-figure salary funded by billionaire Pierre Omidyar. He's going to keep funding James Harkin's pro-war propaganda from the CIA. That's what they're doing over at the Intercept. That's who James Harkin is. And every time I put my attention on a reporter from the Intercept, it turns out they're fucking garbage. Jeremy Scahill doesn't know how to ask a follow-up question. Isn't that amazing? He doesn't even know that the Syrian war is happening right now and that we're occupying still occupying their wheat fields. And doesn't even so here, this guy says he relies on Bellingcat, a UK-based organization specializing in open-source online investigations run by Elliot Higgins. Who is Elliot Higgins? Nobody. He's a guy who got money from the government who was, honestly, a gamer. He played video games. That's what he did. And so that's his expertise. So now he gets money directly from the CIA or directly from the U.S. government to do this. And they refer to him, Elliot Higgins, whose eagle-eyed attention to photos of barrel and improvised chemical weapons earlier in Syria's civil war on the blog Brown Moses had won him a reputation in the field, a reputation from CIA hacks who were pushing war in Syria. They don't mention where he came from or what his credibility is, what his credentials are. They never mention it. You know why? Because he doesn't have any. Bellingcat also reviewed the work of the Syrian Network for Human Rights, which had estimated 55 deaths and 860 injured as a result of the apartment building attack, as well as that of the rescue organizations generally known as the White Helmets. Now, we've shown you here on this show that the White Helmets are actually not an independent organization, but they're actually working alongside UK intelligence and al-Nusra and al-Qaeda and ISIL in Syria. Would that be correct to say that, Aaron?
That's absolutely correct. There are videos of White Helmets members taking part in executions, in celebrating with al-Qaeda members who have just recaptured towns. It's a really shady organization that got a lot of money from the belligerents in the Syrian war, including the U.S., UK, Saudi Arabia, Turkey. And they're basically used as a propaganda to manufacture support for regime change. Again, Max Blumenthal at the Gray Zone has done great stuff on this. And you know what's interesting, Jimmy, in this little paragraph he's showing here? Every single group mentioned here, Bellingcat, the Syrian Network for Human Rights, White Helmets, all funded by the U.S. and its allies. And that's what they do here. They create these organizations, give them the facade of being credible and independent, and all they do is confirm the narratives required to wage the dirty war.
Paying close attention to the publicly available imagery, Bellingcat literally the Intercept Intercept does no original reporting. They don't talk to the reporters that actually went there. They don't talk to the award-winning reporters. They don't talk to Aaron Mate, Max Blumenthal, the Gray Zone, Robert Fitt. They talk to nobody. They just repeat Bellingcat. They're just repeating their bullshit reporting, which is completely 100% CIA propaganda. And that guy, James Harkin, will receive a six-figure salary, just like Ryan Grimm, just like all the garbage reporters over at the Intercept. It's amazing. Paying close attention to the publicly available imagery, Bellingcat concluded that there had been at least 34 fatalities from the apartment attack as a result of a gas cylinder filled with what is most likely chlorine gas. Jesus Christ. The rest is history. 6 days later, the United States and its allies launched cruise missiles from the air and from nearby warships and submarines. Beyond the war in Syria, the cloud of misinformation that enveloped the attack in Douma stands as a cautionary tale. Oh, look, they're so responsible. He's such a responsible guy. This is a cautionary tale for us clear-minded, sobered thinkers. In the era of fake news, It is a case study in the choreography of our new propaganda wars, with the mainstream media in wholesale retreat, and in the case of Syria, credibly threatened with death from many sides. New information actors have stepped into the breach. But their photos, videos, and social media posts also offer a vanishingly narrow subjective view of how conflicts unfold. As a result, such artifacts have become light weapons in an information war that easily becomes an end in itself. If this guy could be a shittier writer, I'd like to see it.
Yeah.
It shows you don't have to have talent to get a 6-figure salary to write for the Intercept, because this is the shittiest writing I've ever fucking seen. This is not writing. This is worse writing than an instruction manual to build a desk. This is unbelievable. What is this? Did IKEA write this?
Jargon.
Go ahead.
It's the kind of jargon we see now in all these articles trying to spin a meta narrative involving Russia and disinformation, that, oh, everything is so confusing, the public doesn't know what to believe, and there are all these shady actors trying to confuse you, but we're the ones because we're from the West and we're funded by the same governments fighting these wars, but we're going to forget that for a second, and we're the ones who can tell you the truth. It's all this lofty jargon to try to confuse people into thinking that there's something complex about the reality here, and it's to spin a narrative to ultimately justify the pro-war NATO narrative, and that's what this guy does here in a really cynical way, which I'll talk more about after.
Okay, there's a little bit more to this. Something like Duma will happen again, and soon. Investigative reporting now needs to be about breaking through the noise of electronic information in a climate thick with propaganda, conspiracy thinking, and half-truths. Most of it we're printing right here uncritically in the Intercept.
Exactly.
Otherwise, the next world war, might begin with a grainy, contested image launched online from some distant and inaccessible outpost right onto the pages of a newspaper that has recently sacked all its journalists. What is he talking about there?
He's trying to pose as a champion of journalism.
Yes, I know.
That's what he's doing.
But
The
what
Intercept
is
does this. It's one of their scams. They pretend that they're like a bulwark against this attack on journalism.
But what does he mean by a newspaper that recently sacked all its journalists?
He's trying to suggest that, media is being gutted, so we don't have the journalists that we used to have to report on stuff, and that he is somehow an answer to that. But really, he's trying to take the fact that journalism is being gutted to do more garbage journalism,
Yes.
and in a really cynical way. Because ultimately, what's interesting about this article is he did actually find more evidence of Duma being staged, and he acknowledges it. But then he goes and makes this conclusion that despite his own evidence that he found, the Syrian government was still guilty, which is like, I don't like to use the term gaslighting, but that's gaslighting. It's the most disingenuous kind of journalism I can think of, where you try to cover your tracks by presenting some actual facts, but then still telling your audience that they should believe what's right in front of them.
Yes, don't believe your lying eyes. Believe the interpretation of the guy who's repeating CIA talking points at the Intercept.
Yeah.
Don't believe your own eyes. Go ahead, Ron.
What do you have against the word gaslighting? I'm just curious. I mean,
I just think it gets used. There's
grifter, gaslighting. There's a lot of words that get overused right now.
Sure.
Grifter is the number one. If someone doesn't like that you make money, if someone doesn't like what you're saying, they'll still and you make money off it. Then you're a grifter. That's it.
Well,
And
I
you
would
have
say
sold out.
I'm sorry.
I would say we've reached a point where like grifter has completely lost all its meaning. I think that gaslighting, usually people use it in the proper context for the most part. I don't know. What do y'all think?
I withdraw my critique of gaslighting, Ron.
No, it's fine. I was just curious. I'm not trying.
But I will say about grifter, like if you're directly funded by your audience and you have an audience and you haven't sold out, like is the case with Jimmy and Glenn Greenwald, then they'll call you a grifter.
That's right.
100%.
Sure.
Even though you're doing the most like pure form of like work possible, was funded directly by your audience and not relying on some corporate overlord to like tap you on the head and like let you in, they'll call you a grifter.
That I know. The Young Turks are not grifters taking money from Hillary Clinton donors to the tune of $24 million. Somehow that's not a grift. Having your YouTube show on an MSNBC platform, somehow that's not a grift. Having a contract with MSNBC and never criticizing MSNBC on your YouTube show, somehow that's not a grift. Taking NATO money to say it's been a great honor to meet a war criminal, that's not a grift. Somehow, all those things are grifts, but getting direct funding from my viewers, that's grifting. Selling tickets at live events that people want to come be entertained by, somehow that's a grift. And I also live in a house. It's weird nobody ever mentions that Cenk Uygur lives in a house that's worth at least $4 million. No one ever mentions that shit. Go ahead.
Well, in your case too, Jimmy, you even put a tag at the end of your video saying, don't give us any money because no one has a job because during the pandemic, but yet you're still a grifter.
Somehow I'm still a grifter, as the Young Turks does the most televangelical kind of fucking fundraising for an entire year. For an entire year. 3 emails a day from Cenk's iPhone at 2 a.m. But somehow they're not grifters. Annika Spirit and Cenk Uygur are all on the up and up. But somehow I'm the grifter. Isn't that amazing? I've been to the executives' houses who work for the Young Turks. They're all multi-million-dollar mansions. Every one of them. Every executive at the Young Turks has multi-million-dollar mansions in much better parts of the city than I live. So here he is. Here's this guy. This is from May 2nd. Just the other day, he retweeted this fucking bullshit article. Wow. And he says, re-upping my long read on Duma at the Intercept. Spoiler alert for the swivel-eyed. It was a low-tech chlorine combination cylinder, and the government did it. So that's not, he doesn't have to take that down. He doesn't lose his Twitter account. The Intercept isn't locked out for a week. Nothing happens. And this is a completely bullshit story, 100%. And the CEO of YouTube will say that they have to boost them and fuck us, even though we're the one telling you the truth and the establishment isn't. Why? Because the fucking YouTube is the establishment. That's why. YouTube is working with the intelligence community. YouTube's owned by Google. Are you fucking kidding me? The most profitable company in the history of the world. They're the ones who are supposed to give you free speech. That's never happening. But they will push a bullshit guy like James Harkin and the billionaire fund in Intercept to push pro-war propaganda that is so easy to debunk, I'm doing it high. And you want to know how else I know it's bullshit? Watch Joe Biden tell you.
What my constant cry was that our biggest problem is our allies. Our allies in the region were our largest problem in Syria. The Turks were great friends, and I have a great relationship with Erdogan, which I've just spent a lot of time with. The Saudis, the Emiratis, etc. What were they doing? They were so determined to take down Assad and essentially have a proxy Sunni-Shia war. What did they do? They poured hundreds of millions of dollars and thousands of tons of weapons into anyone who would fight against Assad, except that the people who were being supplied were al-Nusra and al-Qaeda and the extremist elements of jihadis coming from other parts of the world. Now you think I'm exaggerating? Take a look. Where did all of this go? So now what's happening? All of a sudden, everybody's awakened because this outfit called ISIL, which was al-Qaeda in Iraq, which when they were essentially thrown out of Iraq, found open space and territory in eastern Syria, worked with al-Nusra, who we declared a terrorist group early on, and we could not convince our colleagues to stop supplying them.
So I don't know. I guess James Harkin he doesn't have access to that video. The Intercept doesn't have access to that video. They don't know what's actually happening in Syria. I knew what was happening in Syria. Does he even mention timber sycamore in that article? Do they ever mention? I mean, it's just so. What would be your response to that video, Aaron?
Well, look, so that video is a good example of what I was talking about before, where Jeremy Scahill did this new thing about Biden's record on empire. But he omits completely something like Syria, where the Obama administration launched a dirty war, and Biden just admitted to it. Now, Biden left one thing out there. He left out the critical U.S. role. He was trying to blame U.S. allies for pouring hundreds of millions of dollars in weapons and fighters into Syria. He left out the U.S. role. The U.S. role was massive. It was, some estimates say it was $1 billion a year, one of the most expensive covert programs in the CIA's history. According to the Washington Post, I think, at one point, $1 out of every $15 in the CIA's budget was going to the Syria dirty war. And that scandal, that catastrophe, is completely omitted from Jeremy's series on Joe Biden's record. So it's like he talks about things that have happened way in the past over which we can do nothing now. We can't change what happened in Nicaragua or El Salvador in the 1980s, but nothing about the ongoing dirty war in Syria, where the U.S. is occupying a third of the country and imposing murderous sanctions that prevent it from rebuilding. And it's there's a tie there too with Harkin, a similar kind of thing with his article about Duma. So Duma is about a specific alleged chemical attack, and Harkin does this long article, and he even finds evidence that the White Helmets and other groups there were involved in staging a scene at the hospital, faking a scene in the hospital in Duma of a chemical attack. So if somebody is staging a scene to fake a chemical weapons attack, wouldn't you automatically think, well, okay, what else was staged?
What, right?
Harkin does the exact opposite. He reports on the staging, but then still declares that the Syrian government was guilty of a chemical attack. It's gaslighting journalism, and he wrote that in February 2019. And the timeline is important because a month later, the OPCW's final report came out, and that final report totally aligned with the Harkin-Bellingcat narrative, right? So it seemingly confirms it. But then what happened? Then we got the most explosive leaks, I think, of this century, where we saw that inside the OPCW, the actual team from the OPCW that went to Duma to investigate found no evidence of a chemical weapons attack, found evidence of staging, but their evidence and their original report was doctored and censored. Their superiors tried to put out a bogus report that made a series of unsupported claims aligning with the U.S. narrative. And then when these inspectors protested the censorship of their findings, they were sidelined. They were completely kept out of the process. So what was exposed was a cover-up. And Harkin now 2 years later, he comes out and he shares his original article as if nothing else has happened. He says, spoiler alert, the Syrian government did it. And what I said to him was, spoiler alert.
Well, here's what you said. Here, let me show it. Let me show what you said. You said, since you've apparently been living under a rock and swivel-eyed as a result, you need a spoiler alert. Months after your long read came an even longer one, the original suppressed OPCW report and other docs that found no evidence of chlorine gas attack. And you went on to say, James Harkin, to my knowledge, neither you nor the Intercept have ever even acknowledged the OPCW's team suppressed findings and the brave whistleblowers who challenged the cover-up. Why are you, 2 years after the OPCW leak surfaced, still whitewashing this scandal? Well, there's no way to, there's no way to know if they're being directly funded by the CIA or if he's on the payroll. There's no way to tell if he's being directly funded by the CIA and how much money. There's no way to tell if he's getting $10,000 or $20,000 or $100,000 from the CIA. There's no way to tell how much money he's getting. There's just no way to tell. And so maybe that's why he's doing it. Here is the, can I show you how bad the Intercept is? This is how bad the Intercept is, right? First of all, they hire a guy like Ryan Grimm to do such obvious propaganda that even I could see it. And now I've exposed him, and he's running around trying to rebuild his reputation with the left. Here's the Intercept's editor, Betsy Reed, handling the conspiracy theories collapse when Mueller set a very high bar. Tacit equals high bar. There were a zillion connections. So listen to what she says. This is what she says after the Mueller report landed, and we all knew he said there was no evidence. After Mueller said there was absolutely no evidence of collusion or a conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia. None. And here's what she said about it.
And this idea of like a conspiracy, which, Mueller defined narrowly and set a very high bar for as a tacit or express agreement with the Russians. I really think what the picture you get reading the report is that the Trump campaign was not sufficiently competent to execute an agreement like that. Like, it's just a complete mess. But there are a zillion connections with the Russians and attempts to kind of, work together in some loose way. So I think that there's plenty of evidence of a kind of soft, loose type of collusion in the report, but just not that, high level.
She even does the up voice like a teenage high school girl. She even does that kind of collusion. She even did that. Hang on, I'll end it.
Conspiracy. And then, of course...
So there it is. So that's just, again, there's a million different things that we could never prove. It's all circumstantial. It's all insinuation, and there's no hard evidence. In fact, the guy who's been investigating it for 18 months just said there isn't. But I'm going to still say that there is because I'm a paid propagandist. I'm Betsy Reed. And there's no way to know how much money she gets directly from the CIA to say shit like that. There's absolutely no way to know if it's $100,000 or even $1 million. I don't know how much she's getting. There's no way to know if she's getting money from the CIA or how much it is. What would you say to that, Aaron?
Well, look, we do know that she makes $500,000 to be the editor-in-chief of The Intercept. And look, it's that comment there from her speaks to the absurdity and the self-parody that The Intercept has become. It was founded on the Snowden leaks, the biggest national security state expose since the Pentagon Papers, founded by Glenn Greenwald, Laura Poitras, Jeremy Scahill. Now both Glenn and Laura have left. And as Glenn will say, he said publicly that the people who took over The Intercept, like Betsy Reed, have no relation to its founding ethos. And it speaks to just how powerful our propaganda system is, that even a website explicitly founded with the aim of being adversarial, and founded by real adversarial journalists, all the Intercept's founders are genuine adversarial journalists. Jeremy Scahill has done great work. But just not recently. Recently, he's been doing really shit. Recently, I certainly have a lot of criticisms, including what we're talking about.
That's what we're talking about. We're talking about the Intercept's recent shit work.
Yeah, but it speaks to that this even a website dedicated to being adversarial. Our propaganda system is so powerful that it gets co-opted into having a situation where your editor-in-chief is so incompetent that she's still clinging on to this idea of soft, loose type of collusion, all because she bought into this Russiagate propaganda campaign and doesn't want to admit it. And now is trying to find excuses like Mueller set a high bar. And she even says he defined a conspiracy as tacit. That's a very low bar, actually.
That's the opposite of a high bar.
And a zillion connections with the Russians. What does that even mean?
Nothing.
And then, of course, there were no connections with the Russians. There were a couple people with Russian passports who spoke to people in the Trump campaign. But that's in the brain of a demented Blue Anon member who has embraced this Russiagate stuff. That becomes a zillion connections. And you're the editor-in-chief of a website that's supposed to champion whistleblowers and supposed to champion adversarial journalism. It's an even bigger joke, honestly, than the New York Times and the Washington Post, because at least the New York Times and Washington Post don't pretend to be left-wing. Yes. And super adversarial. This website's supposed to be left-wing and adversarial, and they still end up reproducing the exact same propaganda as the people they're supposed to be different than.
It's just amazing that, again, me in my garage, high, and not kidding about that, can literally take them down. Could literally just blow their shit away. Again, so I love going on Twitter and people trying to push back against my criticism of the Intercept. I go, well, just show me their report on Syria. Just show it to me. Show me their reporting. I'll show you my reporting, and theirs sucks. Show me their reporting on Russiagate. I'll show you their reporting, and I'll show you mine. Theirs sucks. The last time they did any real reporting was when Glenn Greenwald and Aramate were being allowed to be published in the Intercept. That is no longer. Their coverage is 100% garbage. And in the words of Glenn Greenwald, their founder, The Intercept is shit. How many awards does this guy Harkin have? I'll tell you how many awards Aaron Mate has and how many that Glenn Greenwald have. How many does that fucking Mackey guy have? How many does Betsy Reed have? I'll tell you how many Glenn Greenwald has. I'll tell you who broke the biggest stories of our generation. It's Glenn Greenwald and Julian Assange. It certainly isn't pieces of shit like the Betsy Reed over at The Intercept or that fucking propagandist Harkin. That's amazing propaganda. Mackey, Harkin, Betsy Reed, and Jeremy Scahill now is a willing dupe for the establishment because it pays well. How many stories does he have to write a year? 3, and he gets $100,000 or $200,000 to do fucking nothing? except push propaganda, and to not ask follow-up questions when he has AOC. Doesn't ask a follow-up question. Why? Because he's a shittier journalist and a pothead comedian, or because he's willingly a shitty journalist? That's what it is. The second one. And this...
look, and what happened to Glenn is pretty extraordinary when you think about it. Because, look, these people would not have jobs if not for Glenn Greenwald.
I know.
The Intercept was founded on his reporting on the Snowden leaks. So... And then also during Russiagate, as you mentioned, he was the only one actually doing good reporting on that. And he basically saved their reputation as a genuine adversarial site because the rest of them were going along with it, basically. Like they hired Jim Risen just to basically write Russiagate fan fiction. You go back and read his stuff. It's laughable.
It's like Mad Magazine when we read James Risen.
Absolutely. It's all fantasy. And so the guy who's responsible for, so many people's jobs, the site wouldn't exist without him, and then saves your adversarial bona fides during Russiagate while the rest of you are drinking the Kool-Aid, they still throw him under the bus when he tries to write a story about Hunter Biden because they fall for this stupid scam that it might be Russian disinformation.
Again,
and they don't want to look as if they're possibly helping Trump, even though, of course, publishing an article would have zero impact on the outcome of the election. But they're just so beholden to this liberal culture that they're willing to sell out their founder. And it's crazy, but look, it's like there's a lot of poetic justice in seeing how much Glenn's Substack has taken off, how wildly popular it's been, and how much their donations, as they're even saying now, are on the decline.
Yeah, I mean, everybody who pushes the shit lib Syrian propaganda and then runs interference for the Democratic Party, like even the Young Turks, they're hurting too, just like the Intercept, as they should be. You're doing horrible fucking work. You're lying to your own people at the behest of the establishment. You should go bankrupt. But, of course, the Intercept will never go bankrupt because they have billionaire funder. And you remember, the difference between a million seconds is, 11 days? A billion seconds is 31 years. So there's a big difference between $1 million and $1 billion, and they have endless money. The same thing with the Young Turks, right? One of the richest guys in all of media is on their board, is their funder. Jeffrey Katzenberg. So that they'll all, even though they're losing their direct funding, they'll have their grifting corporate funding to tell them to go stop Medicare for all whenever they need to. So, and
yet both still ask for donations too. And the reason why the Intercept asks for donations and pretends as if it needs audience support, it literally sends out these scam emails, marketing emails signed by, the people who are still there.
We're going to cover that in the next segment. We're going to cover those. You're right. Sorry. I have a whole thing set up about that. Okay. We're going to cover that. And somehow the Young Turks aren't grifting. Even though they had $24 million, why do you need more money? What are you doing over there that we aren't doing here? What are you doing over at the Young Turks that we are doing in my fucking garage and doing it better? You don't need $24 million to do this. But apparently you do if you want to live in $1 million mansions on the west side of Los Angeles, like the executives at the Young Turks do. All right? I mean, Cenk lives in the most richest neighborhood in Los Angeles. And so do the other people who are the executives over there. So, but again, it's my house. I actually, after 30 years nonstop headlining comedy across the country, somehow I shouldn't be allowed to buy a house. It's fucking... I have 2 Comedy Central specials, a special on Hulu. I sell out theaters all across the country, but somehow I'm not supposed to be able to buy a house in Los Angeles. But Cenk Uygur, because that's a grift, but Cenk Uygur could do straight up fucking Democratic Party talking points. Everyone sees it. He lives on the west side in the richest fucking neighborhood in Los Angeles in a, $4 million house, I don't know how many millions it's worth. I've been inside it. It's fucking huge. And it's in the nicest neighborhood on the west side. So there you go. But it's my house. Jimmy Dore, at the age of 55, got to buy a house after he toured as a headlining comedian for 30 fucking years. Somehow that's a grift. Cenk Uygur, who never sold a ticket anywhere, took $24 million from Katzenberg. He's got a fucking multi-million-dollar house in the richest neighborhood on the west side of L.A. But Jimmy Dore's the grifter. You can all go pound sand. And go ahead. You can get your news from them. You can go get your news from the Intercept. Go right ahead. Go right ahead. Hey, everybody, this is the part where I tell you where all our live shows are, but there aren't any. And then this is why I tell you to join our premium program and get extra content, but nobody's got a fucking job. So just enjoy the video.